welcome to everybody joining us virtually at Exeter Library. Obviously, we're not at Exeter Library, you're in my kitchen. But I'd like to welcome Dr Mark Aldridge. Mark is a senior lecturer at Southampton University in film and TV. Is that correct?
Solent University, but it's in Southampton.
Solent University in Southampton. He is also the author of Agatha Christie on the Screen, and he's joining us this evening to talk about his latest book, which is called Agatha Christie's Poirot, the greatest detective in the world, which I very much agree with. So thank you, Mark, for coming and talking to us this evening. 2020 marks 100 years since the first publication of Poirot's debut, A Mysterious Affair at Styles. What sort of inspired you to write the book and tell us a bit more about it?
Well, it is a very nice coincidence, actually, that it's 100 years, but that actually was a coincidence. So I didn't sit around thinking, oh, it's 100 years, I should do something. It was, I had done this previous book, Agatha Christie on Screen, which was all about the adaptations, and was a colossal project, absolutely massive, came in at like 168,000 words, I think, in the end, and was just a bonkers idea that I could write about every single Agatha Christie adaptation, but I did it pretty much in sort of what I found when I was researching that was a lot more information and stuff that wasn't perhaps relevant for that book, but that I thought, this is really good stuff, and how am I gonna ever get this out to other people? And not long after the book came out in 2016, I'd done a few little events for it, and I really enjoyed it. And I just felt that I wasn't done with Agatha Christie. You know, I'm an Agatha Christie fan, and I knew that there was loads more that I had to say, and lots that I could still research that I knew would be new and would be, you know, genuinely stuff that people hadn't heard about before. So I sort of just sent a speculative email off to HarperCollins, because my now editor is there, and we had met a couple of times and said, do you know what, when I think about it, I'd really like a guide, like where is that book? So if you say, oh, I'm going to sit and read Dumb Witness or Murder on the Orient Express or something, I thought, where's that book where you can find out the context, the background, a bit of an idea of what the story is, how it was received, how it's been adapted? Where is that book? And it's not there.
No.
You know, there have been some things. Well, Charles Osborne did a really nice book in the 90s, but I mean, that's 25 years ago now. And so much has changed since. We know so much more now. And so that was my thinking, really, was that I just said, there is a real gap here for this book, and I'd really like to do it. Mere year later, we finally got everybody to go, okay, and let's do it. So I did it, and then finally it's here.
That's great. So how did you come across, you said you're a fan, I am a fan too. I came across Agatha quite late in life, and read pretty much everything in about a year. How did you come across Agatha, and what was the first one you ever remember reading?
Well, this is a tough one but I can never quite remember the first one that I read, but the background of it is quite straightforward. Like a lot of people, it's my mum, because a lot of people have someone in their family. So my mum had a nearly complete run of the story of the books, and I'm actually from Devon. I'm from Ivybridge originally.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not very far from, you know, Torquay at that stage. And so I do have a dim memory of going to the centenary, the 1990 centenary events that are in Torquay, because that was 100 years since her birth. And one of the things we got there was this bookmark, which had all of her books listed on it. And it became a bit of a thing for me and my family, that we would go around sort of market stalls and car boot sales and whatever, and try to pick up sort of second-hand versions. They were always second-hand because they seem better when they're...
Yeah, that's what I'm on that at the moment. I'm just starting my collection of second-hand ones because the covers are amazing.
They are, and there's so much history in them, and you feel like there's so much love in them as well. So that was our project for a while. But I watched them as well, you know, the adaptations, the David Suchet ones, the Miss Marples with Joan Hickson. They were big deals in my house. So I watched them as well as read them. I read a lot of short stories initially, and I think I read a couple of the more thriller ones early on. But the one that I really remember that properly hooked me was was And Then There Were None. You know, to
Yeah.
actually, that's the one that made me go, wow. Whereas the others I thought like, yeah, well, I really enjoy these. And that's the one that made me go, oh, they're brilliant. So she sort of hung around me, or I've hung around her ever since, really.
So is And Then They Were None a favourite? Have you got a favourite? Because I think I have got a favourite. But
what's your favourite? Let's start with that.
My favourite is Death on the Nile, because I just think it's got, I like the glamour. I like, and second is Dead Man's Folly, and that's because I bought it at Greenway and read it afterwards. So
Beautiful Greenway, where of course that's, you know, quite clearly the setting. Dead Man's Folly, both great titles. For me, I think that And Then There Were None sort of objectively is her best. I think that there's something about that is absolutely perfectly constructed and everything like that. I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to say what my favourite underrated ones are. You know, the ones that people don't talk about very much, because all of the big titles are brilliant, so you could almost pick any of. But I love Sad Cypress, which is one that people don't talk about very much.
No,
but
you don't.
But it's a really clever one. It's very interesting the way that the sort of mystery is constructed. I love that one. And I also love Mrs. McGinty's Dead, which very few people talk about, which is like Poirot in a village, and it's really funny.
Yeah.
It's really funny to see Poirot stuck in a boarding house and with all these people and all these conditions that are out, you know, the worst thing that he could go for, he could be, you know, stuck with. So that I'm going to cheat and say that those are the two that I think are probably most underrated, that should get a little bit more credit.
Yeah, I'm a bit like that with her supernatural one. So I think Endless Night is amazing. I think that was one of the ones that really like left me with my mouth open after when I read that one. I listened to it actually, which was even better. I think they do really lend themselves to audiobooks.
They do, because and lots of them are first person anyway. Lots of them aren't, but quite a few are. And there is this thing about, there is comfort in the description of murder in these people. Yeah. You know, you sort of know what you're getting. But actually, Endless Night's a really good example of one where you don't really know where you're getting. Because it's a fantastic. Anyone watching this who's unfamiliar with Endless Night, it's sort of initially about this sort of relationship between, you know, someone who's quite wealthy and somebody who's sort of perhaps been struggling a little bit more, and there seems to be some type of vendetta that's stopping them. So you're not quite sure what the book is for a really long time. You're like, is it a mystery? Is it supernatural? Is it a thriller? And that's great, I think.
It's quite dark, isn't it, as well? It's
really dark, and her stuff from the 60s, which, you know, that's a later book, is much darker, I think, generally. I mean, you can sort of find exceptions, but they're certainly more cynical. They're certainly less, you know, more pessimistic about what people are like and what sort of society is like, and you can sort of trace that journey with her quite well, I think.
That was one of the things I was going to ask you about, because so she wrote one of my least favourite books, which I think was actually one of her least favourite as well, which was The Big Four, and The Mystery of the Blue Train, which was originally the Plymouth Express, wasn't it, which she changed. And in the book you say that she didn't hate, but she'd really disliked Mystery of the Blue Train, and she wasn't overly enamoured with The Big Four either. I mean, I can see why, because I just didn't really like that one at all. But do you think that, you said in the books that it was because of the time in her life that happened?
I mean, a bit of context, I guess, for anyone who's unaware, that those were the books that came out shortly after her disappearance, and you can say all sorts of things about her disappearance, but the thing about it that's most important was it was a very traumatic period for her. Her marriage had ended, her mother had died, you know, it was a hugely difficult time of her life, and so she had various commitments and various, you know, need to make money as much as anything else. And so when she came back from her disappearance, she needed to get a couple of books out really quickly. And The Big Four is actually really a collection of short stories that she'd written several years earlier.
I hadn't realised that until I read in the book. I thought she'd just gone mad on James Bond or something.
Well, I think it's quite a nice example of where she was sort of earlier on trying to work out what type of stories you could put Poirot in. because it's this sort of action adventure. There's spies, and there's all sorts of poison darts and everything that you can think of. But she had clearly tried to find a way, and we know that she was trying to find a way to make these into novels very quickly. So Big Four she was very down on, but Blue Train she would go back to repeatedly up to sort of the 70s. Actually, when she was asked about her books, she would always remember that as one that she hated. And it's not a great example of Agatha Christie, but it's fine.
It's not. I wouldn't have put it down as. I mean, Big Four seemed like a huge move away from what she did, and I guess that sort of makes sense now, that if she was trying things, and then it just got all put together. But The Mystery of the Blue Train isn't that different, is it? Really, I guess that was probably a personal thing for her.
I think so. So she'd expanded it from the short story, and it really shows the expansion. There's lots of dead ends, especially early on. But I think that actually what's quite interesting is when you go back and read some of the reviews at the time, that they were much more positive about some of the books that we now see as her lesser works than probably we are now. There is this thing that actually at the time there didn't seem to be a great feeling that she had sort of lost her way. Because they're still solid. I mean, for the Big Four, although as an Agatha Christie it's not what we would expect, it's still a very sort of enjoyable, entertaining book in its own right. Just perhaps as an Agatha Christie, not quite what people are looking for.
No, I think that's true. When you looked at her disappearance, I always find it really fascinating that so for people, did you want to tell people who don't know about her disappearance what sort of happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, essentially it's quite a straightforward story where she disappeared in sort of late 1926 because she had a bit of a breakdown. I mean, that's the way that we can infer from it. That's what we can infer from it, because her husband had left her, her mother had died, and she sort of went off and reappeared in Harrogate. But actually, there's all sorts of ways that we can look at it. That she, there are different ways you can interpret that. And I think I'm almost the only Agatha Christie person in the world who isn't interested in it. I actually don't think there's much in it, because she went to a hotel and she didn't tell people that much about it, but actually she did sell some people apparently, and it's all a bit of a fudge. I mean, she wasn't well, she went away, and then she was sort of hounded by the press a little bit, and I think it's sort of made out then to be more than it is, because I mean there's even a Doctor Who episode about it, isn't there? So there's a film, Agatha is all about it, a fictionalized idea of it, and there are books that people have interpreted what they might have done. Andrew Wilson's done some great books, so there's lots about it. I can understand why people think it's really exciting when you hear it sort of slightly out of context, but when you just see it as somebody who was having
she needed some time out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So going back to Poirot and sort of the fact that he's still going strong 100 years later, what do you think is why he's so popular, and what is it in his sort of is it his enduring charm that has carried him through 100 years of being popular? And
I think charm is a nice way to put it, actually. That there's sort of identifiable things about his character, his fussiness, the fact that he is so methodical. Sometimes he's a bit of a romantic, sometimes less so, but quite often he's wanting to do a bit of matchmaking, and that's all really sweet, and that all really works, nicely in the context of these types of books as well, where there are often sort of characters who might get together, or relationships that are unclear at the beginning and become clearer later on. I think that actually some of the books he is really important to. So sometimes Poirot is somebody that is a big part, a big presence, and is a focus. But actually, quite a lot of them, he's there to solve the case. And you get the little bits of Poirot and the little bits of his sort of foibles and anything that he wants to talk about being precise or whatever. But actually, very often it's the mysteries. Is that he's given really good mysteries to solve as well. So I don't know that she necessarily thought, I'll save really good ones for Poirot.
No,
he got a really nice selection.
He did, didn't he? Yeah, she's done very well.
And he got to travel the world and go to all these places and have all sorts of different crimes.
And I think he's interesting, because I think you could really dislike him. If you could really dislike his order and method and his, fussiness, but it does come over as quite endearing, I think. I mean, some people might not find him endearing, but I personally do. But
well, I think there is that thing that Agatha Christie allows you to laugh at him as well. So
yeah,
you are attuned to him, you understand him, and you want him to do well, but also you're allowed to see him as being a bit ridiculous. And of course, famously, she got fed up with him fairly early on anyway. But I that's another thing that I suspect is overblown a bit by herself. The way that she spoke publicly about him was much more negatively than the way that actually she seemed to communicate with like her agent, and she would say, oh, should this be a Poirot one? And when they're discussing what books are coming up. So it didn't seem like she was as aggrieved with him as perhaps she sometimes said. But definitely I think she felt that he was somebody who early in her career, perhaps, especially in the 30s, was perhaps somebody who was a bit of a millstone around her neck, that she felt that she was sort of stuck with him. And I had a theory, it's only a theory, that actually it was things like Miss Marple's and Then There Were None and The Mousetrap and all these successes she had that had nothing to do with Poirot. I think she then sort of warms to him a little bit because she's realised that actually she doesn't need him for success. And that actually she can do brilliant things without having to bring her Belgian onto the page again. So,
but I think we'd be all disappointed, wouldn't we, if he didn't come along? So, I've got one question here. So, with such a prolific and acclaimed series of David Suchet playing Poirot, do you think there is much of a future of Poirot on the small screen?
Yeah, I do. And David Suchet is fantastic, was fantastic, 25 years sort of playing Poirot in a marvellous series of adaptations, many of which were very faithful, some less so, but mostly really being very Agatha Christie on the screen. Yes, I do, because actually they are a very particular type of adaptation. And they're the type of adaptation that I would say we big Agatha Christie fans love. That they are very heritage based, you've got beautiful locations, it's all set in period, costumes are great, everything looks beautiful, and it's about the sort of mystery with a little bit of lightness from the characters as well, so it's not all about crime, and they've done that really, really well. But that's not the only way to do it. There are other ways to tell it, and there are things like Sherlock, there are reinventions of the crime genre that I think really show us that actually there are other ways to tell it. I might not like that version as much, but what it also might do is bring new audiences in. I mean, it's quite interesting. I remember looking at sort of bookshops not long after Sherlock had been a success, and you got these reprints of the Sherlock comes over with an introduction by Stephen Moffat or Mark Gatiss or whoever from the series, who would be explicitly reintroducing these things. And readers aren't idiots, they're going to know that if you do a Poirot that perhaps is much more modern, that perhaps is much more about the character, they know that isn't actually necessarily what Agatha Christie literally wrote. They know that's a modern way to look at it, but that still isn't necessarily going to stop them going back and reading Murder on the Orient Express or whatever they want to do. So I think that definitely is a future. I think probably not for a very long time would we see one like the David Suchet one, which is quite a straightforward series of adaptations. But I think something a bit more left field, there's every chance, I would say.
Yeah, because we had the Sarah Phelps one, didn't we?
ABC.
That was, and I really quite liked John Malkovich as Poirot. I thought he was. So who is your? What? So I am sensing there is you have a favourite Poirot, but I could be completely wrong here. So who is your favourite portrayal?
Well, it would be David Suchet for me. He's the one that really fits and does well for me. But I would also say that he's not the only good Poirot.
No.
There are others. Ian Holm actually played Poirot in a one-off play in the 80s, TV play, and it was fantastic. So that's one example. I know lots of people are very affectionate for Albert Finney. He isn't one of my favourites, but it's another interpretation that people really like. And I have to say, although I don't necessarily think he is the Poirot that's on the page, that the amount of enjoyment and entertainment from watching a Peter Ustinov adaptation, I mean, there is no better way to spend 2 hours than Evil Under the Sun, on TV.
No, it's great. Me. Yeah, no, I like them. I saw your the interview that you did for as part of the Agatha Christie Festival, where you were showing some of the lesser known Poirots, and they were quite entertaining. And they are also. So, do you have a least favourite? Is there one that you think no, they are not Poirot?
That's a good question. No one's ever asked me that before. That's very interesting. Yes, I guess I do, but I would say it's not the actor's fault. But I think that the most bonkers one is the Alfred Molina, who played Poirot in a TV version of Murder on the Orient Express back in 2001, which was set in the present day, which had Poirot on the internet and, know, with a sort of a computer stylus as a clue, there's someone that's dropped a stylus on the floor. It was ridiculous. So although he is, I'm going to say he's the least because he's such a great actor that it sort of doesn't matter that his Poirot wasn't great. Should he stumble across this, he won't be he's done all right.
Well, I think it's okay, isn't it? I think it's a personal thing, isn't it, of who you, because I must admit, and I'm if Kenneth Branagh is watching, I'm sorry, but I'm not a huge fan of him. So I love the film. I think it's beautiful, and I think he's not my Poirot. My Poirot is David Suchet, and I think that's the thing.
That is the thing. It's always about, it'll be interesting how people change what they think about it as time passes. Because
definitely.
To move into like Miss Marple for a moment, 10 or 15 years ago, it was Joan Hickson or nothing, and that still is the case for me. But it's been interesting that as time has passed on the ITV ones, when you see the Agatha Christie Facebook page asking people about their favourite Marples and stuff, actually Geraldine McEwen comes out of it really well. She doesn't normally win, it's still usually Joan Hickson. But for somebody who at the time, amongst the hardcore fans, was probably seen as quite a bit weaker or less of a Miss Marple than some others have been. It's amazing that has shifted, and I think people do mellow a bit in their opinions as time goes by. So it's really tough to talk about stuff that's only a couple of years old, because I don't really know what I think about it yet anyway. I'll probably not know for another 10 years.
Well, my husband's I haven't. Miss Marple, it has taken me a little longer to get to warm to, I must admit. But we've watched the Joan Hickson, and I do concur that she is my favourite Miss Marple so far. I think she just comes across the whole, she's not as annoying as I mean, I know she's supposed to be annoying, but she's not as she's clever and annoying in but yeah. Do you like Miss Marple? Are you a fan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I love all of it. I mean, absolutely. You were mentioning the supernaturals, the ones earlier and stuff, and I think that even her ones that are about relationships are really interesting. That are less so about mysteries. Miss Marples are great. I mean, you can't love every single one of them.
No.
I can't think that every single one book or short story that she wrote is a classic, but there is something about them that always keeps me reading, and that's hell of a skill to do that over the course of over 50 years, nearly 60 years actually, pretty much 55ish, between when she wrote Styles and when she wrote her final one. It's 56 years, I think. That's quite a long time to be actively writing books that people still want to read in the 21st century.
Yeah, and I think as well, I've heard so many people say that they're like their comfort reads are the ones they go back to. I've seen lots of people in lockdown who said they've gone back to Agatha Christie because they're familiar and they're, they want something that they know. Because I think I've read them, I've read a couple of them a few times, but I've only read them really once through. And you can read them again and find so much more that you didn't see the first time, or probably second time or third time.
Absolutely, you can. And it's interesting how the pleasure in reading it changes. That first time round, you tend to be very focused on the mystery and working out who done it. And then second time round, if you can remember who done it, which very often people can't, including myself, then actually the pleasure is from either enjoying the construction that gets you to that point and saying, wow, that's a fantastic bit of misdirection that I obviously didn't notice the first time around, or just from following the characters, because she's so good at characters, and she really is good at conjuring a world that you can feel that you could understand and that how people operate and work within it. So there's always pleasure in reading Agatha Christie, and I believe that sales of her did indeed go up very healthily during lockdown, and I'm not surprised at all.
No, I think if you haven't read one, and that's one of the questions I was going to ask you. If anybody here is listening tonight and they shock horror have never read Agatha Christie, what would you recommend to be the first one?
That's a good question. I'll give you two choices, because I don't think you should start with the like famous classics, the really big ones. Murder on the Orient Express I wouldn't go as my first one. It's a fantastic book, but actually it's structured slightly strangely because it's very methodical, and so I wouldn't necessarily go for that. And Then There Were None is brilliant, but again, not necessarily for a first one, because there's like a coldness to it that you don't necessarily get usually. My recommendations for a first one would be, if you're in a Miss Marple mood, go for A Murder Is Announced, which might be the best Miss Marple, and is a fantastic read. It's
very good.
That's probably my number one choice if you're going to go for a first Agatha Christie. If you're going to go for a Poirot and you haven't read one yet, then Peril at End House is a really good one that has some really good techniques and storytelling stuff that works fantastically well on the page. So yeah, Peril at End House and A Murder Is Announced. Those would probably be my suggestions, because they're great. They are top tier for me, pretty much, but they're not like the massive titles.
No.
So.
A Murder Is Announced is really good. I went to see a play of it in Paynton, in the Paynton Theatre, and I hadn't read the book before I went to see it, and it was so funny. Everything about it was, and I came home and read the book afterwards, but it is such a good story. And
there is a brilliant bit in that one, which is some of my favourite sort of character moments in all of Agatha Christie, where there is this, newspaper advertisement saying a murder is going to take place at Little Palace tonight, and everybody in the village finds an excuse to come there at that time, and they all talk about all the central heating and all of that, and they're all having, a way into it, and I love that because that's so true. You could absolutely
totally. Yeah, you can imagine it. Somebody like Jed turns up and you've got the sherry and she wants the sherry out, and but it's really clever as well. And I didn't see it coming at all who it was, and it is a very clever. I mean, they're all clever. I mean, she had a real gift to sort of trail her audience along, and then, because like you say, you read them and you forget who's done it, and then you read them again and you go, oh yeah, I forget that. And I do that with the adaptations on the TV as well, because they are sort of, again, they're quite, I know lots of people who watch them as a comfort thing. And so the book is out now.
The book? Should you mention the book, or what happened to have here? Next week.
Next week.
In the UK, the 12th, yes.
Yeah, because I saw on the internet it said the 3rd, and then I went on to look online and it said the 12th, so I thought it would...
It's the 12th. It still moved around a little bit because of lockdown and stuff. If anyone is watching this from anywhere that isn't the UK, which one or two people might be, then it's later in America. It's March now, I believe, because I think they're hanging on and waiting to see what happens with Death on the Nile, the film, and trying to tie it in as closely to that release date as possible. But if you're really keen, places like the Book Depository will ship internationally for free. So, if you're a big Agatha fan, you've got plenty of chances. But yeah, next week, at last, sort of 3 years after starting it.
Wow, 3 years. When I was looking at it, when I was looking through the back of it with the bibliography, and I was just like, whoa, it is, like you say, it is the book that you can go and look at. I loved the covers in where you go in and you've got the covers of the different and the titles that are different. I imagine that was the American and the...
Yes, very often. I mean, that was something that, I should be very grateful to HarperCollins, my publisher, for, because they weren't obliged to illustrate it, but thankfully they, with only a very slight amount of cajoling, agreed to illustrate. So there's over 400 pictures in it, and every sort of Poirot that we could think of has got a nice picture in it, including some that I don't think people have heard of before. There's at least two Poirots in there that I don't think anybody knew about before, because I googled and I was like, does anybody know this guy was a Poirot? And I couldn't find anyone having ever referenced it.
Really?
Yeah, so there's still there's things came up as a surprise all the time. Like, I was searching for something else in an Australian newspaper archive and found that there had been a series of radio adaptations with an actor who, you know, as far as I could see, had never been linked to Poirot. And I just found it because there was an advert with a nice picture of him to boot.
Oh, wow.
So these things that actually, you think, well, people must have listened in Australia in the 1950s, but no one's ever written that down. You know, nobody's ever sort of passed that information on. And it actually, even just yesterday, somebody sent me details about a South African adaptation on the radio, which I didn't know about. So there's something else to the paperback too, but that won't have pictures.
No, I didn't know about the French, the one that you write about, the sort of the one that was quite, I can't say it. I'm not going to even attempt to say it in French. But it's the family.
Oh yeah, Family Murders, or Les Petits Mouettes now of so it's basically a series of adaptations of lots of Agatha Christie stories, including Poirot ones, where they have their own detectives. And the first one they did was Poirot's Christmas without Poirot, and now they sort of do more. And they've done it in different eras, so they've just finished one run with a musical episode, actually, that was set in, I think, the 1950s, and then the next one's going to be the 1970s, I think. So I love that. They just take the central mystery and say, let's do something bonkers with this, let's do what we like, and they completely reinterpret it. And I think that's such an exciting way to tell these stories that have been told so many times already. It's a great new way to sort of see them.
Well, it's sort of, like you say, it brings them into this sort of, and I think the films do that as well, don't they? So, you know, Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile will definitely, you know, attract although they're the big names, that will definitely attract a different audience to maybe her books that haven't already encountered them.
Yeah, I was watching Murder on the Orient Express was on TV a few weeks ago, and I saw it on Twitter, you know, people watching it, and so many watching it for the first time. And there is that lovely moment towards the end when everyone goes, "Oh my God, that's how it's, you know, that was the answer all along." Yeah. And so that's always a bit of a treat when you know that's coming, and you just think, "Oh, you don't know where this is going at all," and she's going to trick you and surprise you by the end of it.
I remember listening to that one in the car on the way home and having to sit up on the driveway at the end to sort of to hear it, so I couldn't get out. I have got a question. So the Audible narrated book isn't available until March. Is that the same in the UK?
In the UK, it should be out the same date as the hardback. I haven't heard it yet, actually. I did get to listen to Claire, the lady who's narrating it, and I did hear a little sample of her other narration. But yeah, the Audible will in the UK be the 12th of November, but for other territories, yeah, I'm afraid it will come out the same time as the actual book. I got to say, and people should go for whatever they want, but my strong advice is, if you can go for the hardback, go for the hardback, because it's illustrated and you can dip in and out of it and go to different sections more easily. But I know a lot of people consume it as an audiobook, and that's absolutely fine. You'll hopefully still enjoy it. But if you're not sure about which one, then the illustrations will only be in the hardback. They won't be in the paperback when that comes around, because
it is a lovely book. It is amazing, and it is, I think any Agatha fan would definitely want it on their shelf, because like you say, it's like an encyclopedia of Agatha, yeah, it's really good. So
it looks beautiful, and I can say that because I didn't design it, but so I'm really pleased that the designers did such a great job.
So I've got the PDF, so it looks great on as an ebook as well. So I can say, so the ebook's got the
No, it's only the hardback, with illustrations. Right, you got a special one.
I did. So I've got a question. What do you think about the Japanese anime versions?
Good question. I love the Japanese anime versions. So these, for people who are unfamiliar with them, hopefully you understand Japanese anime and animated sort of TV shows in this case. But they have done a few years ago now, but they did a fantastic series of adaptations of Poirot and Miss Marple stories. And they are so good. And it's weird because they are really faithful. They tell the stories really, really well. And they do this thing that very few adaptations do, which is they're split into 25-minute episodes. And what that means is that they can use as many or as few of them as they need. So if you've got a short story that hasn't got masses of plot, you can just do it in 25 minutes. If you've got a long short story, you can do it in 50. If you've got, you know, a short novel, you can do it in 75. If you've got a long novel, you can do it 100. So it means that there's no flab in it. You know, it kept very pacey while still keeping everything there. The thing about it is that it being Japanese anime, our lead character, alongside Poirot and Miss Marple and everyone else, is a young girl and her pet duck. So you have to get over the fact that there is a duck that is going to wander through all of these mysteries. But that's part of its charm for me. They are, or they were at least, mostly on YouTube.
Oh, were they? I was going to say to you about the French ones as well. Are they available?
They are available certainly on DVD, or some of them are available on DVD with subtitles. I think in some countries you can get them on Amazon Prime, because I know I've seen people elsewhere watch them with subtitles in other countries. I don't think they're on Prime in this country, but I'm not 100% sure. I've got the DVDs, so but you can find them. I think it'll be all right.
Yeah, I think it'll be good. We're surprisingly, we're nearly at the end. I'm just seeing if anybody has got any questions, and I'm just seeing whether I've got any more questions, because I had lots, and I'm not sure whether I've asked you them all. So let's have a look. So we haven't got any yet on the live. So she really, one final thing I'll say to you is, like, the 1934 Murder on the Orient Express we were just talking about. She liked her trains, didn't she?
She loved trains. She loved cars as well. She was a big fan of cars. She loved trains. She'd always loved the idea of riding on the Orient Express, which she obviously did before she wrote the novel. She did love trains, but I think part of that is not just because she loves trains, but because you can sort of seal off an environment, and it's one of those things that you sort of have to buy it a little bit in Murder on the Orient Express, that nobody from another carriage was able to sneak in. So it's a perfect sort of closed circle, sealed environment that you know that the murderer surely has to be somebody who's on that. But also they're great because they can be manipulated, so you can think that, you know, you've seen one thing and actually you've seen another, and like, especially going through various sort of stations. I mean, there is, I shan't ruin which one it is, but there is a story that's all about, actually you think that someone's got on the train at one station, but actually they've got an off one at another, and it's all these things about, you know, she doesn't ask you to study timetables, which some history writers do, but she does see them as really good devices. So yes, she loved her trains, because, you know, 450 from Paddington's another.
I was going to say that's another, that's a really good one, and that's that, I think that was another one of the first Miss Marples I listened to, and I really like that one. I think that one again is really clever, and I think that's Miss Marple at her best. Then she's really on the ball. But there's some, it's just amazing, and I just think it's fascinating that, you know, 100 years later Poirot is still going as strong as he ever was.
Well, I say at the end of the book, he will outlive us all. There is absolutely no question that people will still be talking about Poirot in 100 years for his 200th anniversary and saying, do you remember that book someone once wrote? Honestly.
That would be really cool, wouldn't it? So I think he has aged incredibly well, and I think, you know, the fact that he's getting a new audience 100 years later, and, you know, with some, you know, really, really big names. I think the film is still due to be out in December, isn't it? So
it is at the moment. I mean, who knows with everything. No, I don't seem to be very many cinemas open. But at the moment it's still sat with December 18th. Yeah, I
desperately do want to see it. I'm really looking forward to it. Well, thank you for coming along this evening. It's been brilliant. It's gone so quickly. Like I say, we could probably talk all night, but we would probably bore everybody. But thank you, and I hope the book does really well. When you if you write another one, maybe come back again.
See you in 4 years. Yes.
What, have you got anything planned? Do you have?
Who knows? Who knows? Let's see how this one goes first.
Yeah. Oh well. Good luck.
Thank
you. So I'm just waiting. We'll just say goodbye to everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Karen.
Thank you.